Welcome to the Be Bold podcast. I'm Beth Whitman. Thanks for joining me for another episode of the She's Bold podcast. I'm recording this the day before I take off for India, where I'll be for the next 3 weeks. And what I'm doing is I'm going to be leading our South India tour there, but I'm arriving a week in advance to do some research for a future tour. So I'll be landing in Mumbai, which is in the western part of the country, and then I'm heading to the state of Gujarat. And there I'm going to experience the tribes, the textiles, and the music of that region. And then I head to the east to Chennai. I fly over there, and that's where I'm going to be meeting up with my group. And then we travel south down through the southern part of the country. So the next time you hear from me, I will be in India. Technology, huh? It's so crazy. If you're new to the podcast, this is where I feature conversations with women who have inspirational stories to share. We're talking some really kick-ass women. They are breaking new ground with what they're doing, and they epitomize being bold. Now, these conversations are so important because when you hear stories about what other people are doing, it makes you realize that what you're dreaming of, what you want to do, might just be possible. Now, having a goal, seeing it through to the end is no easy task. But I think sometimes we forget that. We look at other people and their accomplishments and we get the impression that things come easy to them. But behind the scenes, there's a whole lot of hard work that goes into realizing a dream. And I think it's good to be reminded of that because then we consider our own goals. We realize it might be as quote unquote easy as breaking these goals down into small steps. And then we see how those small steps move us forward and move us forward and forward until, ta-da, we've reached our goal. So why am I talking about all this? Because you're going to be blown away by today's conversation and the goals that this woman has set for herself. Lia Ditton is a professional sailor and rower, and she's accomplished some amazing feats. At 25, Lia was the youngest competitor and the only woman to sail across the Atlantic in a race called the OSTAR. She did that solo. She's gone on to compete in many other single-handed sailing races, including the Route du Rhum, which goes from France to the Caribbean, and also the Transpacific Yacht Race, which goes from California to Hawaii. She then got into ocean rowing and, among other things, did the Woodvale Challenge, which is from the Canary Islands to the West Indies. But now, Lia is training for a 5,500-mile solo row across the North Pacific from Japan to San Francisco. Yeah, 5,500 miles across the Pacific. Though 2 men claim to have completed this, as we talk about in this conversation, these guys technically did not complete the journey. And you'll hear how they fell short of the final miles and what Lia has planned for her own adventure so that she actually completes the entire route. So this is a pretty fascinating conversation, and we take a deep dive into her training, what she's doing to get ready for this big event, and also her diet, which includes a 900-calorie breakfast. We talk a lot about logistics because I had so many questions because I know so little about sailing and ocean rowing. And she really indulged me and allowed me to ask a lot of what I thought were pretty basic questions. I'm sure she thought the same, but I just was so fascinated by this. Okay, before I get to that conversation, just a super quick reminder. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can do so in several ways. Make sure you're subscribed to the episodes so you don't miss any of them. And if you're new to the She's Bold podcast, go back and listen to previous episodes. There are so many great conversations here. While you're clicking that subscribe button, take a moment to leave a review or rating on whatever app it is that you're using. By doing any of those super simple things, you're helping the podcast get some visibility. Please share the podcast with anyone whom you think might enjoy it. Word of mouth is the biggest way a podcast audience grows. So I am relying on you to help me with that. Finally, you can become a patron on Patreon. Just go to shesboldpodcast.com/Patreon, and that will bring you to my Patreon page. As a supporter at just $5 a month, basically the cost of a nice chocolate bar, you'll have access to special written and audio content that is only for supporters. Now, last week, I shared with my supporters the cinnamon roll recipe from Geraldine Brousseau, the creator behind Cinnabon. So Patreon supporters now have Geraldine's grandma's special cinnamon roll recipe, and you could too. It's kind of a cool perk for some loose change, don't you think? Anyway, shesboldpodcast.com/Patreon. And with that, please enjoy this amazing conversation with Lia Ditton. When I first started podcasting, I used to ask guests, just as we do it like a sound check, what they had for breakfast. And that got boring after a little while of me asking that same question. So I usually started a little bit differently. But I want to do something with you today because I find this really fascinating because you are getting ready for this huge event. And we'll talk about the details in just a minute. But I also know that, I don't know, either it's either every woman's nightmare or every woman's dream. You're actually trying to gain weight, which you need to do because you're going to be burning off, 30, 40, 50 pounds on your row. Is that right?
Probably everything I have to give.
Everything. So what right now is a typical day of eating for you? Not just breakfast, but what's a typical day of eating consist for you?
There's a whole list of things that I'm supposed to eat, which came as a result of my blood test. And that's the blood test you've done, actually, with Cristelli.
No kidding.
He's my nutritionist.
Tell me about that.
And so all the things that he told me to eat are in my breakfast. I just get it done, in the first instance of eating in the day. So my breakfast is like a 900 calorie breakfast. It resembles a Burmese tea leaf salad. It has sesame seeds and sunflower seeds and chia seeds and almonds and walnuts and Brazil nuts, and it's just this nut seed oat fest.
Do you put it in oatmeal or do you just
add water?
Eat it in really?
Yeah, and then to flavor it, I have cocoa nibs, a whole pile of chocolate bits, and coconut butter, not to be confused with coconut oil. It's like something you scrape off, and that makes it really flavorful. And the coconut means that you can have it with water without missing milk. So it's very portable. I travel with my own little bags of it.
It actually sounds really good. And except for the fact that it's 900 calories, because that's a half a day of food. It should be a half a day of food for the normal person, but you're eating that all in one sitting.
Yeah, sometimes you have a break in the middle. If you add fruit, it bulks it up a bit. So, but I love it. I don't get tired of it. But I can't eat it on the boat, strangely. I can't then row on that breakfast. It's a non-rowing day breakfast.
Is it because you don't have enough energy from it, or?
I think there's too many nuts for the digestion to then row within the hour on those days. I mean, Brazil nuts and walnuts and almonds are kind of heavy going for rowing.
Do you know you're not supposed to eat a lot of Brazil nuts?
I count out 5.
A day?
Yes.
Yeah, but even then, you're supposed to have like one a month.
Really?
Yeah. It's really high in selenium, and yeah, we have a bag of them at home, and I thought, because John likes them, my husband, so I bought him this bag. And then we read that it's actually detrimental to your system. You might want to just read up about it. And so this bag we've now had for over a year of just this little bag of nuts, because we have at the middle of the month, we each have one of those. Yeah.
I do know that selenium in large quantities is not good for you. And I know this because I was living in Mallorca, Spain, where selenium comes in the water. And that's the reason why you don't drink the water in Mallorca. And when I first moved there, I was all bluster and going, I'll drink the water. It tastes fine. What do you people like? Kind of thing. And then I got severe cramp in the night. I continuously got cramp.
And that's what it was from.
And it was too much selenium. And when you boil the kettle, you can see this sort of white substance kind of sticks to the side of the kettle scale. So it's too high a quantity in the water to drink because all the water comes from the rock, from the mountains.
Interesting. Okay, so that's you've got your first breakfast
Yeah.
out of the way. What else do you eat throughout the day?
I have a couple of snacks on the way to lunch, usually a banana, maybe a block of Parmesan cheese, like 100 grams of cheese, and maybe half a bar of chocolate. And then lunch is usually 50% meat, 50% green vegetables. That's my preferred diet. And then I have to add carbs when I'm doing high load exercise. Your body just needs more. And I think actually carbs are good for the gut, because if you think of all the green veg and fruit, they're all quite acidic. And for some years, I pretty much had a no carb diet, and it was quite hard on the gut. And when I started to creep back in brown rice and some potatoes, then I was generally in better health for it. So that whole no carb thing is a bit of a myth. Plus, there are carbs in bananas and oats.
Right, of course. Yeah, fruit is pretty high in carb.
That's carb-free diet.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think those carb-free diets recommend no fruit, though.
Well, that's something else. That's sugar.
Oh, that's a sugar
more than anything. But yeah, even oats spike your blood sugar. Like, I'm hungry already. We just had 2 bowls of oats, and I have the sensation of wanting to eat again because there's no fat in what I just ate.
I have a jar of peanuts here if you get hungry.
I have some macadamias. They're fattier.
Oh, good. Yeah. Okay, gosh. Okay.
I'll have a bowl of macadamias before lunch as well, and then in the afternoon, well, firstly, I cook with oils. I have above my stove a whole series of different flavored oils, like sesame seed oil and walnut oil and avocado oil. And that's how I flavor my food. And I really shove in as much oil as possible to gain more fat.
And then snacks in the afternoon before dinner?
Yeah, I guess so. Not so bad. I'm much more of a front morning eater.
I am the same way. If I'm working out a lot, I'll have 2 breakfasts, and then I'll have lunch, and then I'm just not quite as hungry in the afternoon. I could really load up much more in the morning.
Well, Wim Hof, the guy who meditates on ice, he's a sort of advocate for only eating within a 5-hour span. And I thought that's really interesting because some years ago, maybe 15 now, I realized when left to my own devices, my natural body rhythm is to eat breakfast in the middle of the night and then eat a second breakfast around dawn, and then eat a sort of third meal mid-morning to noon. And that's actually my natural day. And
then you don't really need to eat later in the day?
No.
Huh, interesting.
So if I follow what my body desires, living on a 24-hour clock, I would eat breakfast anywhere between midnight and 6, and then a second one around 6 or 7, and then what would, I guess, be dinner or lunch mid-morning to noon, and then I wouldn't need to eat again.
Have you figured that out through rowing on these long distance?
That was sailing.
Rows?
That was long distance sailing, where you're up in the middle of the night on a watch. And so I'm sort of nicknamed as sort of midnight breakfast eater, and again mocked severely for it, which is kind of funny.
You know, it's funny that you didn't realize that until you were doing some kind of an extreme event.
Yes and no, because at school as a child, I would get woken up by my hunger in the morning.
Oh,
that was my natural alarm clock. I'd be starving by 6 or 7 in the morning. So I've always known I cannot miss breakfast because, by the time it's breakfast o'clock, I'm already famished.
Right. And to get back to Wim Hof too, I think that's the intermittent fasting where you take a big break from eating. And you might, most people, I don't know about 5 hours, I think is super extreme and good for him if he can do that. But I know they promote 12 to 16 hours for most people where you're fasting and then you're eating within an 8 to 10 hour time period. And I know that's all the craze now.
I know. I'm not sure I agree with it, to be honest.
It's hard for me. It's harder for women too. So it is very difficult for women to stick to that. So I've had a hard time with it. And I haven't seen any benefit. They say that if you eat the same amount of calories in a shorter period of time, that you'll lose weight. And it could just be that I don't have the 40 pounds to lose. So I'm not seeing that benefit, but I just don't see, there's been no benefit for me personally in it. So.
Yeah. I mean, these are rules that might apply to a handful of people, and they're fun to play with if you're looking for answers for better health for yourself. But I mean, certainly that's not a sweeping given for a lot of people, I would say. In fact, I'd say it's a very bad idea for a lot of people.
Hey, let's get back to Chris Talley. So you had your blood work done with him. What was the outcome of that? Can you talk about that?
The surprise outcome was I was really high in arsenic.
Oh.
And I can only think that I got that by living in California.
But like course, from the water?
Yes. But of course, I have no precursor to that test to know. In fact, blood work as a whole is not done in the UK. I mean, I think I had my first blood draw, as it were, for analysis only a year or two ago. So, I mean, if you're very sick, then sure, then they draw blood. But they draw it for very limited reasons. We'll look at your platelet level or something. It's not the extent of
well, not many
analysis that you have in the US.
Right, but not many people are doing it to the extent that
yes,
Chris Talley's
this is
doing.
another league
Yeah.
completely.
Well, but let me tell you an example though. So I went to my doctor it was probably 6 months before I did the Chris Talley draw. And I just went, I had no idea that I was going to be working with Chris Talley. So I had my blood done and, my stuff came out, pretty good. But I did a heavy metal testing just out of curiosity because I'd heard so many people talking about the importance of the heavy metal testing. And I wasn't feeling any symptoms or anything, but I really had to push my doctor, and she's a naturopath. I really had to push her to allow me to get this done. Like she was being resistant. Like, well, you're not feeling any symptoms, so why do it? I was like, I want a baseline. I want to know. So I did it. It was a urine sample, and it came back totally clean. 6 months later, I do the Chris Talley thing, and you know what it's like. They're taking 10 vials of blood and a whole 2 cups of pee or whatever. It's just crazy the amount that they're taking from you. And I had that done, and I came up. Both John and I had high aluminum in our system. So like you with the arsenic, it's of concern and you're trying to figure out what's going on, but it never showed up in my other heavy metal testing. So it just goes to show you the quality of the testing really matters too, not just everything that's being done, but it's just that quality.
Very true.
So anything else that came up from that? And have you gone back and been tested again to see if that arsenic is gone?
I've done it one more time and I'm sort of due now for the third time. The other one was xylene, which I'd never heard of, which is apparently a chemical in dry cleaning, which is definitely not where I got it, trust me. But I have had years working on boats with cleaning products, and so it would have come from that. So no great surprises there. And also high in mercury from all the fish that I've eaten.
Ooh.
And no surprise there either.
Yeah. Have you curbed your fish eating as a result of that?
Yes. In particular, the heavy metal fish, the tuna and swordfish. Well, I didn't really eat a lot of swordfish, but backed off the tuna.
Mm-hmm. Have you noticed anything physically, like any improvement, or do you just think that stuff is all going on subtly underneath it?
It's very hard to say because I've gone through a complete transformation in 2 years, and so I couldn't say it's one thing or the other. All I know is that whatever we did on the back of that test has drastically improved my gut health and therefore my quality of life.
So what else? Well, first let's talk about, let's just kind of drop this in there for listeners, what it is that you're training for and then why things have changed for you so much in the last 2 years. So can you explain your the quote unquote little project that you have going on?
So I am in my second year of full-time training to row from Japan, Choshi, Japan, to the Golden Gate Bridge of San Francisco, which is 5,500 miles across the North Pacific Ocean. And I'm doing this solo and unsupported in a little 21-foot rowboat.
Oh, is that all?
Yeah.
No, it's never been done by a woman. And technically, it hasn't been done by a man, although 2 men are credited with having done it, but it's not really.
Well researched, yes. Both of the men who rowed solo were towed the last distance, 20 miles and 50 miles respectively.
Do you know why? Did they just give out?
No, the first one was in a way justified. No one had done it before, and he was 20 miles on the other side of the Columbia River Bar, which is a very dangerous body of water. It's where an enormous river funnels out to sea through a narrow outlet. And he was in the other side of a giant shifting sandbar, and his chances of getting safely inside there were slim. And so he was encouraged and towed to end it and towed. So that was, I think, fine.
Was that in Washington State?
It was, yes, Astoria near.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So in Oregon. So it's kind of on the border of Washington State and Oregon.
Well, the second guy, Emmanuel Contra, he drew an invisible line down from where Gerard had finished and said, I'm calling that my finish. But he was further south, so that was actually 50 miles from land. And he really did that because if he had continued after this invisible finish line, he would have been set north by a huge storm, and goodness knows where he would have ended up. And he definitely would have ended his row after Gerard's, and therefore not broken Gerard's record. And that did get disputed quite heavily at the time, but his sponsor's PR company went into bat for him and saying, well, you can't expect him to stay out there in the storm and et cetera, et cetera.
Well, what makes yours different that you think that you can do land starting in Japan and did they start in the same place in Japan?
Yes, they did.
Okay, so what makes you think that you can start in the same place and actually touch land in San Francisco?
Well, clearly the US West Coast was going to be a big challenge in this row. So you've got to get off the coast of Japan and you've got to cross. But both of these men showed that the West Coast was the final hurdle. And so I moved out here to train that coastline. And that's where I've been for these last 2 years. And it's been a whopping learning curve. I mean,
because it's so much more difficult than you expected?
It's extreme. And there are so many currents and tides and forces and natural phenomena that even if forecasts don't necessarily play out as they should.
And that's different than other parts of the world?
Yes. I mean, San Francisco is famous for sailing in the sense that if you can sail in San Francisco, you can sail anywhere in the world. That's what they say.
No kidding. I just saw Kim Swims. Have you seen that documentary? I'm actually speaking with Kim Chambers next week for the podcast down in San Francisco.
Cool.
And
I know her actually.
Oh, you do? Okay, great. So she swims across the Farallones from the Farallon Islands.
She did a record swim from the Farallones back to the Golden Gate.
To San Francisco. And she does talk about the difficulty in that it's one of the hardest swims in the world. Yes. And I didn't understand that. Now I understand better because it's not well defined in the documentary about her. But now I understand, speaking with you, you're saying that it is completely different than any other place. Yeah.
Yes.
So does that petrify you, or do you just think, okay, I'm just going to learn that and figure it out?
Well, that's how I felt at the beginning. And so I moved out here and I realized actually I was kind of scared to row from Alameda, which is southeast corner of the Bay Area, even just across to San Francisco. And rightly so, when you arrive, people talk about the 5-knot rush of tide under the Bay Bridge it is. And, what are the influences of how does a wind wrap around Treasure Island? And by the time I came to do it, I was asking all sorts of people, what do I do with this? And you have this vision as a rowboat that you have, that if you lose control, if the elements are too strong, you'll end up on the rocks. Like where are you going to be? Big ships, cargo ships coming through that bridge. And rightly so. When I did that short row, it was like 4 or 5 hours, I streaked under that bridge sideways. Like I didn't have control in that current. And then the next hop that was of significance was across the bay north to Sausalito, and you've got the gate trying to suck you out like a draining bathtub. So
will you have to go through those in your big journey, or did you just want to learn the currents and learn how to navigate in difficult circumstances?
Yes, I wanted to learn because the bay is like an ocean in a bowl. You can cross it any which way, pretty much without support boat at any time of the year. And there's nowhere else I could think of that would rival that with those challenges.
Would give you as wide of challenges, as you said.
I mean, going around Alcatraz Island took 3 goes. And then every time I went out the Golden Gate Bridge, it was sometimes the thing I learned was humility. And other times it was not going to happen today. And I fought to get away from the bay and the points of danger.
When you go out to do one of those training rows, do you have crew with you at that time, or are you out there solo? Like, because you don't know what the circumstance is going to be like, are you nervous enough that you've got people who are there supporting you? Or do you just think, okay, today's the day I'm going to go ahead and take my boat out, and you just go out?
If I'd had a choice, I would have had a support boat, but I didn't have the money or the manpower, and so I went solo. And in a way, I'm not sorry, because then you really learn. You're out there on your own, and if it's not going to work out, you've got to find a solution.
And you're going to be out there on your own anyway.
Right.
So you have to figure it out.
So really, the best thing I got out of going out the gate multiple times was confidence. And then where to go if I needed to wait, if the tide had turned, the calculations of that. Really, am I going to make this tidal gate or not? And if not, what's my plan? You
did a big row last year, which gave you an idea of what you might get yourself into. And I know there was one night that was really difficult for you. Can you describe that training row that you did?
Sure.
Is that what I should call it? Training row?
Yeah,
okay.
It was a training row.
Okay.
It was a sort of thing in its own right, but it was a training row. So firstly, I rode the Atlantic 8 years ago, and I did it with somebody else. And so I didn't come to ocean rowing without experience. I had the 3,000 miles of rowing the Atlantic. And then I'm a licensed captain, professional sailor. And so I think 150,000 nautical miles of experience. So it's sort of laughable that a few miles across a bay would scare me, And maybe that's really part of the appeal, was to go back to that spot where you're back at the beginning and you're out of your depth. So to refer to last year's training row, I rowed from San Francisco down to Santa Barbara, which is 350 miles, but down some of the most revered coast in the US, which is the West Coast.
Do many people do that?
Row?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
I didn't call it a record or anything because it was a training row and I didn't really care.
Yeah.
But I suspect that I know of one lady who did it in legs rowing. I know a couple of people prone paddled it in legs, stopping all the time. And I know one lady left Monterey and drifted down to Mexico. I'm not sure it was definitely not intentional. And she did go past where I went.
Yeah. Okay.
But she left a little bit further south.
Uh-huh.
But I have enormous respect now for even what she did. She was trying to go to Hawaii, and her name was Elsa Hammond, because of potentially what she would have gone through in just that stretch. So I left San Francisco on a day where it was questionable that I would even get out the gate. I left at 2:30 in the morning on a 4.5 knot outbound tide into 18 knots of wind. And that's a gamble. Is 4.5 knot sort of conveyor belt enough to punch into that much wind? I didn't know. And I found that sort of terribly exciting. And at times you're like, I'm not sure I should be doing this. You're going around the headland, you're getting blasted. And I was going sideways, and then I regained the control of the bow and the steering, and we were off. So I got out that night. And then the next 3 days I fought to get away from the bay. And I didn't know how much the claw goes out from that tide, but it's 15 to 20 mile.
What do you mean the claw goes out from that?
So it's a bowl, the bay, that drains, and then it sucks all that water back in again. And so if you get outside of that reach, you're off. But I had to fight to not get sucked back in every cycle of the tide. I had to hold my ground with my sea anchor out in shipping lanes. Like, I'm navigating shipping lanes, because outside San Francisco, there's a huge convergence of southwest and northern shipping lanes, and they come into this ring. And then from the ring, one of the boats comes out. The pilot vessel comes out, and then they get guided in. And so you've got giant ships converging all the time on this ring as I'm trying not to get sucked back into the bay. So there's only so many places I can go on the map outside these shipping lanes. I call it the central reservation. So I'm basically in the central reservation, zigzagging, trying to get away from the bay.
And how long did it take you to do that?
3 days.
Didn't you want to just say, I'll take a flight?
Well, like day 3, you're like, should I just give up? Like, is this going to happen?
Right. I mean, that's a long time just to try to get out. There had to be a lot of perseverance to do that, which is actually the name of the video that you have, right?
Yes, it is the film we made out of it.
Yeah, so that's what comes to mind. But I don't think that was even mentioned in the film, that it took you 3, and it's a short documentary, like a 8-minute documentary on Vimeo, and I'll link to that in the show notes. But it doesn't even, I don't think it even addresses the fact that it took you so long, that basically 1/4 of your trip down to Santa Barbara was just trying to get out of the bay.
Right.
Oh.
And so I didn't blog, I was busy, and that drummed the beat right from that minute, because I had 10 days worth of food, and that was arguably right at that point not enough. And on that coastline, it's fine, there are options to pull in, but I didn't want to pull in, because this was coming at the end of not a streak of failure, but a streak of unsuccessful training rows that had been blocked by weather, or I'd come back in sooner, and I was feeling this sort of weight of humiliation from that. And I really wanted this. Like, I was going south, and I was going to go as far as that food was going to take me.
Yeah, you were determined.
And then finally I tripped off the shelf. I managed to get away from that reach.
Was it a moment that was like that? There was almost like when you break into something, maybe you're hammering, and then it's just like tap, 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 and then you break through? Or was it you made your way through and eventually you realized you were on the other side of it? Or was it just like a big whoosh and you were through?
No, it was exciting because my depth sounder was on, and as the depth got deeper, I was making it off the continental shelf. And then, it hit nothing. We were off. So I was like, if we can just get to 300 feet, if we can get to 500 and then boof, the depth sounder's like, I'm out of here. I'm done with this.
And when you say we, you mean you and your boat?
Yes. Yeah, okay. That funny?
No, but I just wanted to clarify. I thought I knew that. So there's a photo, there's a number of photos online and probably on your website of a very colorful boat. Is that the boat that you took?
Yes, that's my current training boat.
And then is that the boat that you plan to take across the Pacific?
It is not.
And then what's the status of the boat that you'll be taking across?
That's been the part of the reason that this has taken so long is that I realized that the boat that I have was not going to be key to my success. And it was a very hard realization because the sponsor that I had at the time, who'd come in as title, did not back that decision to change the boat. And
was it because of the cost? Or?
It was how that boat behaved in the bay. It was heavy. And I thought, I'm just not strong enough.
But they didn't want to back it for what reason?
They did not want to back my change to a different boat.
Right. Because it would cost them more?
More time, more money. And they weren't interested. Yeah, so in the bay, the boat was heavy. But I wasn't strong enough. That's the narrative I told myself. And then the wind would hit that back cabin. And I was like, this boat is not maneuverable in the way I would like it to be. But maybe I don't know enough about how it should behave. And then along came Discovery Channel. And we made a show called The Daily Planet. They featured me for that. And they told me the history of the other people that they had filmed who had attempted and not succeeded in rowing the Pacific. Specifically, a man named Charlie Martel, who'd been rolled in a typhoon in 2012. And he had the sister ship to my boat. And I'd reached out to Charlie, but he didn't want to talk. And there's some stuff on the internet about what happened, but unless you speak to, the pilot in the chair, you never really know what happened. But the Discovery Channel told me this boat was picked up almost vertically and dropped face down onto a wave. And that is not designed for that. And so a wave punched in the main cabin and he had to be rescued. So add that as a layer on top of what I already felt about this boat and the fact that this boat had been abandoned mid-Atlantic and washed up in Ireland by itself. That's how I came to purchase it. The Coast Guard had put a grappling hook through the deck, torn up the deck. And when I saw that on the news, I was like, no one's buying that boat except me, because no one's going to want a boat to row solo for the first time with holes in it.
So you bought that boat thinking that that's what you would do with it, that you would be rowing solo with it.
Yes. But I never planned to row that boat. I thought I'll buy it, I'll fix it up, maybe I'll sell it, or I'll just row it and it'll be training. But I never really wanted to row it across an ocean. And the reason was that after I bought it, we knew there was something up with the main cabin and it had taken a hit and had to be completely replaced. So I bought a shell, it had to be gutted, and it wasn't ideal. And the reason it's not ideal is because a boat is like a box. If you smash it on one side, it's never entirely true. And even though the yard that did the refit were saying, we guarantee this work, and I agree with them, I just don't think that's the right boat to row across a northern ocean. I think it's a wonderful boat to row to Hawaii or across the Atlantic, and it's so tripped out now, like 2 years of fine tuning.
It's beautiful, yeah.
It is so beautiful. Ready to go. Like I feel like I should just row to Hawaii just because it's so ready to row to Hawaii. But for the North, it's arguably not the right boat because that's only 55% downwind, not maybe 75.
So the sponsor who wasn't on board with that, are they no longer your sponsor?
Yes, we parted ways.
Okay, that's fine. And just was curious about that. But then if you had gone with your current boat and this sponsor, would you have done this a year ago? Was that the plan?
Yes.
Okay. And so now you're working on another boat.
We've designed a new boat.
And then what's the status of that?
So I'm in Seattle today. And yesterday we went up to the naval architect and I went to Bet's Boats up in Anacortes on the journey to find a yard to build the boat. And we haven't announced what we're doing next. So I'm not going to announce it just yet.
Yeah, that's fine. And so you have an architect. So presumably you will build a boat that's similar to your current one in stature. And I don't know what the terminology is for it, but it's like in design, it'll be very similar, but it'll be a lighter boat because that's what you need.
Yeah, so it'll be carbon fiber rather than wood and glass and Kevlar. So that halves the weight. And that very specific about wanting a boat that was the same weight as the 2 men rode. I mean, how can you be on a level playing field if you don't have the same pitch?
Right.
So that was important. But also, let's look at the design. So consider my boat designed for a trade wind route, for which this is not. And both of the boats that the French men rode were radical, arguably not suitable, but they took new ideas and said, okay, well, this crossing is different. We need a different boat. And so that's what we've done also.
And how long will it take to build?
4 to 6 months.
So you're still a year out.
Yes,
is that right?
2020.
Okay. Oh, 2020. Okay.
Yeah.
So your expectations were that you would be leaving this year.
I'm ready to leave this year, physically, mentally, emotionally.
Yeah.
But the boat isn't built.
How is that for you mentally to have to put it off another year?
Good question. I have put it off now 1 or 2 years. The first year was absolutely out of the question. In fact, we shouldn't even have gone to press with that 2017 as an option, because we never meant it to be 2017. But Yo, who was my sponsor at the time, wanted it to have more immediacy. So that was a mistake. And the second year was really hard to tell the world that this isn't happening as it was supposed to. And now I'm obviously getting more practice at it.
You're more confident.
But also I've slid into a different mode. I think when you're in your early 30s or even 20s, you have this like urgency that it must happen now. And I see this again and again with expeditions that they go, you are clearly not ready. In so many ways, you're not prepared, you're not trained, you don't have the right equipment, whatever it is, but you're going to go regardless. And
yeah, but
as you get older, you go, well, that is not going to lead to success. And therefore, I'm going to do it right.
I appreciate that. And I don't disagree with you. But I also think that there's a fine line between having people tell you you're not ready to go and you knowing that you're ready to go and you do it anyway. Because
yes,
I did this motorcycle trip from Seattle to Panama, and I did it was solo. So I was on a BMW motorcycle. And it was, 7,000 miles over 9 weeks. So just a one-way trip. But I had people tell me before that trip, people who were supportive of it, but still told me in the motorcycling industry, you're not ready for this. We're going to pull our support from you. And I was like, I'm going to do it anyway. So you either support me and I'm going to do it. We'll do it together. Or I'm not going to, or you not support me and I'm still going to do it. And they followed suit and they supported me with it because they saw how determined I was. So I think, like I said, I totally respect your decision. I know that you're making the right decision.
But this is different, isn't it? I'm making the decision. Nobody's
exactly.
telling me that I'm not ready.
Right.
I'm saying I am ready. I just don't need a boat, you know?
Yeah, right. Yeah. But no, I guess my point, and just, basically for listeners, I just want to make sure that people use outside influence all the time to not do something.
Sure.
Constantly. That is what, and especially for women, that is what stops us from doing so many things. And I just think we have to know in our own gut and our own heart when it's the right decision to do something and to follow that. And that's knowing yourself, knowing yourself and knowing what you're capable of and what you're not capable of and when the right circumstances are. So I just want to be really clear about that, because somebody will hear that and they'll go, oh, well, so-and-so said I shouldn't run a half marathon. So I'm not, I'm not going to run a half marathon.
But it's also, what do you have to prove? And I don't have, I rode the Atlantic and this will be my 14th ocean crossing. I'm not really out to prove anything. So it is a very personal journey that I'm going on. And yes, so somewhere in last year, it switched from this, I must do it in this way, to I'm going to do this and I'm completely committed and it'll take the time it'll take. And my only concern with that, of course, is something I can't foresee in life going to happen in the middle. But I am committed, it is happening, and I'm just doggedly persevering towards that.
Well, the other thing, too, is that are you afraid that there's another woman out there who's planning this same thing who will slip in before you?
Good luck to her.
Oh, you'll learn off her lesson.
Yeah. So again, I don't have anything to prove it in that way. So, Charlie is having another go this year. And definitely many times I've thought, Lia, you have a boat, just go race him. How fun would that be? in basically sister ships. But that's his journey and this is mine. And really, once you've left the land, you're on your own row anyway. So you might as well stick to that. I think there's a great phrase, what is it, in Baz Luhrmann's song, Don't Forget the Sunscreen. The race is long and in the end, it's only with yourself. I'm on my path. And a lot of this project has made me give up caring as much about what other people think. And I felt that heavily last year when, things weren't going as well. And then the sponsor and I, we parted ways, and, the weight of what other people must feel about that. And now it's like, I'm doing it, it's different to how we started, but I'm doing it. And everyone is in a way caught up with their own lives, and they care and they look and they're watching, but we are obsessed with our own lives. It's just the way the human brain works.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned you've been working full-time, you've been training full-time for the last 2 years. So a couple questions about that. Are you also working as a captain still to make money, or are you just training, like you're in full-on training mode? And then also talk about what that training mode is, because very earlier in the conversation you had said your diet has changed tremendously. Everything has changed for you over the last 2 years. So what does that look like?
Yeah, so training full-time. Firstly, I've had the odd job here and there. Like I had a part-time job over the summer at weekends on a 40-foot trimaran whizzing around the bay. And that kicked off because my car needed more work and I had money to fix it. Yeah. And then another job I took to kickstart the design process, which was a chunk of money that I needed sort of now. So every now and then I do take the odd week or two to go and deliver a boat.
So is that kind of work readily available? Like if you put your name out there will be a project that comes up where you can captain a boat?
They approached me. Okay. So I didn't go looking for it. And I think when people can think about doing a big, long expedition or an adventure, say the Appalachian Trail, they go, but I can't quit, my career and all of this stuff. And it's like, not really. You'll go through this incredible journey, it'll be 6 months and it will change your life. But back on land, back with the rest of us, 6 months goes by really quick and you'll get work and it'll be like it never happened. And that is a fear point for a lot of people when they say, okay, I'm going to quit my job or I'm going to go and do this. And as they go, what happens on the other side? This fear of not being able to return. And there is plenty of work out there. You can go years, in fact, and still come back to the same thing. Maybe at a slightly lower level, but you can.
There's a lot of nomads out there doing it now who are traveling around and doing their own adventures. Some of them just traveling, not doing a big event like a big race or, just a big project like you're working on. And they find the same thing, that they can come back a year, 4 years later, and just kind of slip right back into that.
Because you bring something else. You've had a rich life experience. And so it's not like you did nothing. You didn't stay at home and not move for that period of time. So you just bring other things to the table. And I think people shouldn't be afraid of that. It's definitely a point. Okay, so training. At the beginning, it was small. It was like a few hours a week on the boat, but quite a lot in the gym. And it's interesting to look back at the cycles that I've gone through. So it's a lot of weightlifting at the beginning, and it was sort of killing me, to be honest.
Was that your own routine that you'd put together?
No,
or
I'd reached out to other people to help me, and they'd come up with these, here's what you need to get where you want to go.
And they said specifically that you needed to first bulk up, get some muscle on, and do the weight training?
Well, I definitely need to be stronger, but there are ways of doing that. So yeah, 5 or 6 hours of weightlifting a week was making me borderline ill. And there are certain weightlifting...
ill in what way?
It was too much stress for my body. And then finally I did get a flu. Like it literally made me sick in the end. But there are certain weightlifting modalities which I just don't think suit my body. Like front squats with a barbell. There's something about that just shocks my immune system. And Weird. It just doesn't like it. And in fact, even back squats with a barbell, I just don't think that's good for my body. But deadlifting, no problem. Like carrying huge amounts of weight, but there's something about around the neck and the front of the body that just disagrees with me.
And was this just through trial and error and then paying attention to your body that you knew like, that didn't work for me. I had a stomach upset or I got a cold after
my glands would flare up. That's what happened. Yeah. So the trainer I had at the time was like, you just need to work through this. Your body will get used to it. And then after a while I became bolder and I was like, actually, I don't think it will. Like, I'm just going to back right off that and then see what happens, because there are other ways to get that strength. It doesn't have to be through heavy weights. And in fact, I hardly weightlift at all now. I entered a different phase with somebody else, which was way more about balance and stability and building from the ground up, which is the feet, ankles, calves upwards. So a lot more body weight exercise and some elastic bands.
So in the beginning, you were doing the weight training, and then that's evolved over this last 2 years.
Yes.
And you said kind of smaller amounts of rowing.
So the beginning, much more traditional gym type workouts with weights and not very much rowing because I felt the boat was very heavy and clearly I did need to be stronger. And then the second sort of phase was introducing a bit more cardio and a different, more type of weightlifting. So instead of machines, it was Romanian deadlifts and Turkish get-ups and all of this kind of new age weightlifting, let's call it that. And then latterly, back right off volume, right down on the weightlifting and much more body weight, stability, foundation building, and also way bigger focus on rest and recovery and reading the body and saying, okay, well, you may have booked in a session on Thursday, but Thursday's is not turning out as Thursday was going to be planned, and we need to scrap that and just go for go to yoga instead.
Do you take notes? Like when you do a workout, do you take notes what the workout was, how you felt afterwards, and then do you reflect back on that maybe the next day to see about your recovery, or how do you pay attention to all those details?
I have a heart rate monitor, and I've monitored every session with the heart rate monitor chest strap since May 2017, I think. And I have sleep trackers, just changed device. For me, the heart rate is the best indicator, resting heart rate at night and heart rate while I'm working out.
And you do that every day?
Correct. And there are other ways to do it. I did HRV in the morning for a year, but you can mess with that emotionally. So if you're feeling stressed or emotional, the reading for that can be wildly off.
Did you say HRV?
HRV, which
heart
is
rate variable?
Variability. So yes, that crashes when you're getting ill or if you're stressed or whatever, but your emotions can play with it too much, whereas heart rate doesn't lie for me. Heart rate's an incredible indicator of health and stress and well-being, recovery.
Do you have one main coach that you work with right now?
At the beginning, so say around that May 2017, there were a lot of people involved, like a lot of medical advisors and stuff. And there was meetings and time-consuming elements with that. And I minimalized that pared it right down to the minimal people, which is about 2 or 3 now. So no coach.
If you're not working full-time and you've got kind of this team of people that you're having to work with and you're now having to build a boat, how does all that get financed? So
I had a title sponsor back at the beginning. That was the first year. And then because I had a title sponsor, a lot of lower level companies wanted to jump on for 5 to 20 grand. But after the sponsor and I parted ways, a lot of those people who might have jumped on didn't. And so we entered a new phase. I realized that 2 years into that, I'd moved country. I was going to continue and I needed to find a way. I had bought the boat originally, so the boat remained mine, so the training could continue. And I started a Patreon campaign, which is like Kickstarter, but monthly. People subscribe for $2 or $5 or $50. And what I didn't expect with that was the effect. So the money, of course, was hugely welcome, and I was now able to pay rent and continue and not live on my boat. But the unforeseen part was the power of those people signing up.
The community.
I call them my believers because it was like each person who signed up stepped into an invisible room and said, you should keep going. I believe in you. I'm with you. And I just found that incredibly uplifting at a time where there was a voice in my head that said, this is over on a daily basis. This is over, Lia. You're living in a deluded denial world. You have no money. You can't continue. Okay, you have a boat. And this went on daily. And then slowly, one by one, these believers signed up and I was like, all right, I have this sort of believer family and we're going to keep going.
Amazing. I started a Patreon page, I don't know, maybe a couple of months ago or so. And it's that same thing. I just have, a handful of supporters at this point. But I understand that feeling of if somebody's just chipping in a small amount each month, that it's especially on a podcast, because I don't have that reaction from people. I don't have, it's not like a Facebook post where you're getting a bunch of people commenting, or
true.
giving a bunch of likes.
About it like that.
Yeah. So I'm out there, I'm broadcasting, and I have no idea the effect that, that's going on out there. But if somebody's going to raise their hand and give a small amount, that is raising the hand and saying, it's a silent way basically of saying, just keep going. And your Patreon page is still up and running. You're still accepting.
Yes. Yeah.
Tell me what it is, and then I'm going to tell you. I'm going to go and support you.
Fabulous.
Today, I'm going to go, and hopefully listeners will as well. But what is it?
So it's called Row, Lia, Row, which started around that time when I was. I'd set the Farallones, these islands 26 miles west of San Francisco, as my training goal, and I did not succeed. The first time I went 2.5 miles shy of the main island. That was a trial. Is it even possible? Nobody knew at that time, because the last known row from those islands back to San Francisco was in 1892, and the year of the lighthouse keeper, and the lighthouse keeper's son fell ill, and they set off in an open dory, but they were met halfway by the pilot vessel. Anyway, so once I heard that, I was like, oh my goodness, like it laid down the gauntlet. But I had no idea how hard that was going to be. And people were like, row, Lia, row. And I loved it. It was like, run, Forrest, run, keep going. And so I became Row, Lia, row. It was like a new persona that I adopted, and I changed my website and all my social media to Row, Lia, row.
So it's patreon.com/Row, Lia, row.
Yeah,
okay.
LIA.
Yeah, great. Well, I'll link to it in the show notes also. But yeah, I highly encourage people to go out there and support you with just
Thank you.
Amazing stuff.
So, and the second part that was great about Patreon was it was a privacy wall. I could now write the real story of what was happening behind to a forgiving, loving audience. And I really welcomed that. At times I don't, because it's extra work, but I can share anecdotes and write stuff that just perhaps isn't suitable to be in the wider world.
Right. Like you could out the sponsor that dropped you.
I did. I did.
Yeah.
And I made silly videos, which I don't want online. Like, I think one was called Piss Pots and Butt Pads. And I tried 8 piss pots and, 16 butt pads. And I was like, oh my God, this is such an ordeal, just to find something comfortable to sit on, And at the time, the one that was the most comfortable, just to ruin the story for you, was made out of vegetables. And I was like, but vegetables absorb water. And I was like, oh God, I just plunged my head into the thing. And they were enormous fun. And so, we were off. It was a new lease of life for the project, a different chapter. And so that's still going. And I'm up to, I think, 93 or 4 people signed up. And people come and go. I think there's a sort of lifespan of 6 to 9 months per person. And it's a bit different. I mean, for a podcast, I think it should be a steady building thing. But for me, essentially, they're supporting something that's outside of the Patreon, where it's an expression of support, and then they get the backstage pass. But it's not like they get special content so much as musicians, and it's really a platform for musicians and artists.
Right, who can provide something special.
Yes.
Yeah, I see.
So I still do that, but it's in the realm of blogging and videos and photos.
Yeah, well, that's nice to have that extra content for the supporters, though. I think that is great. So yeah, I can't wait to check it out. So I will go do that. So, and everybody else should too.
But in truth, it's been a struggle financially since that point. And getting someone to make the big leap, then all the the lower level tiers will jump on board. And finding the answer, navigating this world of sponsorship is so tricky and different in America too than, say, Europe or the UK. Because I find that you're going to a company with your dream in your hands like it's a eggshell and it's fragile, and you're going, sponsor my dream, and you're vulnerable to being messed with. And often big companies are the worst. They love it, and they'll have 25 meetings, and then they go, well, we're on to the next quarter now, so sorry about that.
My husband always says, I've never had a bad meeting. And it's like, it's that thing where you sit down and you have a great meeting with someone and you think that they're all on board and they're all excited about it. And then they don't return your calls, or your emails don't get responded to. Or like you said, then you're suddenly 25 meetings into it, and it's the next quarter, and it's the next fiscal cycle.
Right, for most people, it's a job. It's a job, and there are multiple things going on with the job, and I respect that. Of course, it's very busy, but for me, it's my life. It's my future. It's my everything now. It's totally different. And then the other issue is that by the time you get to the boardroom, more often than not, it's 100% men. And so I'm pitching something that's basically about women's equality. I want to be the first woman. I want to challenge the men's record. And I know most respectable men care about women and women's equality, but you can never care in the same way as if you are a woman. It's just a fact. Mm-hmm. But if you do find women in the boardroom, they are defending their right to be there. I think a friend of mine referred to it as Queen Bee syndrome. And I've been that person. I've been the one woman on a team of 18 men on a race boat. And it's pretty hard to turn around and give another woman a hand up when you're in such a tender spot yourself. So it's tricky. I don't know how you map that. And I see other people do it quite successfully, but they have a different story. They've come back from adversity, or they've had other challenges that make them relatable.
Do you think that's kind of like an underlying issue across the culture then? That's why we have the competition. And I'm only repeating what I hear other people say, because I grew up with 3 brothers, and I grew up in an environment where I was a tomboy, and I never had that competitive feeling I never had it with a sibling, and I never had it growing up with other women. I never thought that I have to dress better than you, or I have to do something better than another woman. Like, that was just not part of my environment. And as I've gotten older, I hear about it and I read about it, and I hear about kind of the cattiness or that competition that can happen between women, but I don't experience it. So I'm just parroting what I hear goes on out there in the world. But so do you think, maybe you just laid it out for me, that's exactly what happens, is that we, or she on the board, has had to claw her way up, and she's fighting to be there. She's fighting on a daily basis to be there. So she's not necessarily going to lend a hand down to bring you up because her spot is so tenuous.
Yeah, she can't necessarily. Or it risks her own position. They go, all right, we'll switch you out, And I've had that happen on race boats, where somebody that you brought on board has then replaced you in the nicest possible way.
Right. So from firsthand experience.
Yeah.
But
that happens. Sponsorship in my experience so far, has been blocked in 2 ways. One is there's a CEO or a founder or a lead male who's into what you do, which isn't the sponsorship part. Like they're enamored with you rather than the project. And then the other avenue is being blocked by women in marketing. And I struggle with that one. That one's a really interesting one. And that's happened all my career in funding all my projects. And I think a lot of it is relatability. If you're like a woman of adventure, you are almost the antithesis of that woman in marketing who has that 9-to-5 job, potentially in a very respectable company. And there's definitely a part of, I'd like to do that. Why would I fund you to do that when I'd like to do that? I don't know, I'm projecting at this point, but I'm trying to crack that nut. I'm trying to understand what that is and offer that bridge because these are often companies that would make a very good partner, and whoever networked us is puzzled. I'm puzzled.
Doesn't make sense, yeah.
But I see that again and again, and I need to solve that puzzle.
I just watched on, I think it was on Amazon Prime, like Ultimate Everest Survival or something like that. It's a 6-part series that follows a Discovery Channel group of 4 that are climbing Everest. And then kind of outside of their group was this woman named Anna, whose last name I cannot recall. But apparently she's I don't know if she's the first woman to do 7 summits, or she's done the 7 summits, and Everest was part of that. But she was, it's funny because she was clearly outside of the Discovery Channel group. Like, she wasn't supposed to be part of it, and she wasn't credited like in the credits. But she's this socialite. She's a British socialite with gobs of money, married to a fine financial guy, like a banker who owns HSBC, I think, bank. And she's putting on her lipstick and her makeup every day. And she's climbing Everest and just totally backed. But I just thought that was so funny. But it's the person in the marketing chair, you know what I mean? Who's, in one way, she's totally unrelatable. She's completely unrelatable to me, but then she's probably very relatable to the person in the marketing chair, because that's what she looks like, or that's what she hopes to look like, is this gorgeous, blonde woman with this beautiful accent, this beautiful British accent, climbing up Everest, putting on her makeup every morning. It's just crazy.
We want to back people who are less than us, and by that I mean less fortunate, less able, or have had misfortune, or people who are equal. But above us, we're threatened.
Well, it's the underdog, right? It's, Starbucks. I've lived in Seattle for almost 29 years. Starbucks at one time was the underdog. And now they're so huge that you don't want to go there anymore. You want to support the little coffee shop that's down the street. So that's kind of the same thing, I think, is that you want to support the team that isn't doing as well. And then once they do really well, then you're like, oh no, they've gotten too big. I don't want to support that.
Or it goes the swings way the other way. We got to get involved with that. Like, while we can stick a tentacle in it,
Right. Well, the one thing that I would say about kind of the female market and the female adventure market is, for one, it puts some perspective on some things that I've done, because I've come really close to having sponsorship packages, like to the extent that the two women marketers in the room loved me and wanted to sign the check for something. They gave me approval for it. And then when it went to the corporate office, it got nixed. And I was left, it was a hard phone call for them to have to make, like, this didn't get approved after we told you that it was approved. And I was left wondering what the heck happened. But it could have been as simple as it got to the corporate level and there was a male maybe getting ready to sign it, going, what the heck are we doing with this? That's not a good use of our money. So there is that. But I also think that there is a change where companies do seem like they're supporting more women, or at least more women are doing things that are supportable, if that makes sense. Like, it seems like more people like you are getting recognition for challenging limits. Would you agree with that?
I think women is definitely the flavor of the last couple of years, and the rise of women, and how do we integrate women in the way that we should be integrated.
As brand ambassadors or whatever. We're seeing it's, yeah. I think it's...
the companies are trying, but the culture is still there, and it will take a long time. And we have to persist. In fact, one of the things I'd like to do with my believers, this Patreon idea of believers, is actually start a believer foundation after this, to give other projects or grants or the boost of belief, that things that are outside the box, that people are struggling, and persisting, should get a bit of funding and support, or a mentor, or whatever it is they need.
Like a Kickstarter, but for kind of creating our own challenges?
Yes.
Maybe?
Yeah, things that have some ultimate good, that, they have a school connection, or they pushing frontiers, or not just I really fancy paddling down this river,
Right.
And I'll be the first, big deal. But what are you doing for the community, or what is your plan afterwards to give back from this gift? And I think there is a need for that, unless it's out there already, in which case somebody please direct me.
Yeah, absolutely. So this about 2 years of planning and training that you've been doing, and you feel like you're ready to go. What's in store then for the upcoming year? If your row is planned for 2020, how will you spend the upcoming year? Like, will your training get even more intense? Will you look for more challenges in the water?
I would love to do that. I would like nothing more than just to continue pushing the bar higher on my physical training and in my in-boat training. But I have to stop and say, okay, I've got to raise this money.
And you feel like the focus of raising money, which is a difficult part of it, you feel like that actually will take attention and take attention away from doing the training rows?
Yes, it does, sadly. I mean, you can still go for a 3, 4, 5 hour row in the boat, but you can't do what I call like the adventure rows, like to Catalina, round Catalina, down to San Pedro, down to Long Beach. The reason is it's days away. And so you get this backlog of emails and messages and text, and you get disconnected mentally from it. And then when you come back, you're tired, you're hungry, and you're dealing with the flow that you've missed before you start to actually spearhead going forward. So yes, I have to balance that back the other way to gym and shorter rows, unfortunately.
Do you have someone that could work on your behalf?
I wish.
I mean, are there people out there that can
Not
do that
really.
kind of pitching?
There's plenty of people offering on the science side, on the sports physiology and the medical, but no, not on the PR and marketing and business. I can get advice, no problem. You sit down for lunch with somebody and they'll package up some idea of mine, but to do the work, no.
It just seems like if you could take that off your plate and have somebody else doing the pitching and saying, hey, sponsor her to do the Catalina row.
Sure. Not really. I think I'm the best salesperson of my project.
Sucks, doesn't it?
But it's time to go, all right, I need to be rejected twice a week. Mm-hmm. So that's my new plan. I get rejected twice a week, because at least then I'm trying and I'm on the front line and it's going to hurt. But you need to get those answers and you need to close those chapters and move on. And actually some companies are terribly bad at saying no. Like, we hate to disappoint other humans. We really do. And actually, when companies take a week or two to get back to you, it's a no. Like, actually, you don't even need to reply at this point. But it would be nice if you did.
And if it comes back as a yes, then it's a happy surprise.
People can't wait to give you that advice. It's almost immediate. It's like the day after or something. I have something to tell you. Can I get hold of you? They get excited.
Are you? Yeah.
So I want to be building the boat in February. I need to raise 20 grand to start the process. And then it's 26 grand a month for that, per month for the build.
How much a month?
26,000.
Oh, a month.
Yes.
Whew.
So it's 150,000 for the build. And I'm going to do it. I don't know how. I'm going to raise that money and I'm going to build that boat. And it's just going to happen. Exactly. Big breath. That's what I've been doing.
Big breath. Well, my mind is, we can talk offline about this stuff too, but my mind is kind of racing with not the $5 patron, but, the bigger patron. And then certainly you live in San Francisco where there's a lot of money floating, literally.
There is and there isn't. It's very inaccessible.
Around.
Most of the tech money is further south in Palo Alto, and those people are squirreled away. They don't want to be contacted outside of work. So my idea was always, after the row, to slice the boat up into 3-inch ring frames and then hang those frames from the ceiling like a sort of the vertebrae of a dinosaur in the Natural History Museum. And I wanted to do that because I wanted these slices to go on and have other lives as wall sculptures in homes and offices and schools to inspire future generations and tell the story of mostly perseverance at this point. But I thought, hang on, why don't I sell these now so that people can buy a literal stake in the boat? And I love the idea of 60 people basically putting a stake in this and making this happen. It becomes then a community project. And then we have a big party and everyone chooses their slice and you can donate your slice or auction it or give it to a school.
That's a great idea. And you're an artist too. Your background is in art. So when you're kind of mapping that out in your mind as slices of this, I can just imagine you're thinking of it in artistic ways.
Yeah, literally.
Aren't you?
And the slices are kind of incredible. When you take a boat and you take 3 inches of its shell, it is a beautiful thing. It's weird and it's odd, but it's beautiful. Like I'm going to need to keep a slice for myself, But part of it came from visiting Japan, and the Japanese that I met were very excited about being part of history. And so this is like a slice of history. You get to own a slice of history. I mean, imagine if you could have, I don't know, a part of a NASA spaceship that went into space. Wow. I mean, what a thing to own, even though this is not quite the same. But that boat will cross an ocean and then it'll be on the wall to tell its own story. So that's how I'm fundraising it.
That's how you're fundraising.
I'm selling them for $5,000 and I'm packaging that for corporations with a talk. And I have an education program for 4 to 11-year-olds. So I'm saying, hey, look, corporate business, I'll come and give you a talk and you pay me. But at the same time, I'll do a talk in your local school for free, and you buy a slice for your office wall, which you could also donate to the school. And I'm making that a package.
And this is where you're talking about you need to be rejected a couple of times a week.
Yeah. So now I have this product. I'm going to go out and sell
That's
it.
brilliant. I had envisioned you just talking to companies where you've had all these dead ends, but just in talking to companies who might be sponsoring you. But
I don't even want to talk about sponsorship anymore at this point. I just want to sell bits of the boat so we can build the boat, literally that way. And even companies like carbon fiber or resin, if they gave me the materials I need to build the boat at a certain value, they buy a slice. You know, they have a slice for their office. How cool is that? Their head office. So I'm excited about that. You can hear that in my voice.
I know.
This week it's like I'm slice selling.
I know. You know? I am so excited for you, and because I think that's brilliant. I think that's a great way to approach it because it makes it really accessible. It visually and financially makes it very accessible to people. So that is cool.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. And we'll talk. I'm writing some notes down here. We'll talk offline too, because I've got some other ideas for you. Hey, we've talked a lot about what you're doing, what you're training for, how you're training. You know, actually, before we move on, because I want to go back in time and I want to know how you got here, because that is really interesting to me. And I'm speaking now. This whole time I'm speaking as a person who knows very little about ocean rowing. And I actually had Megan Bigging on the podcast. I think she was episode 41 for anybody who wants to go back and hear her story about Monterey to Honolulu, her ocean rowing experience. And she put us in touch. So before talking to her, I knew absolutely nothing about rowing, to the point that as we were sitting there, she had to bring up a photo of the boat and show me what it was like. So now I have a better picture of it. But I still have so many questions for you of the technical aspect of it. And if you're planning your trip, 5,500 miles from Japan to San Francisco, you're expecting 5,500 miles and 4 to 6 months or so.
Correct.
Like, how the heck do you plan your food for that? And where do you put it in the boat? And what happens to the trash? And do you have any contact with people, along the way? How do you communicate? How do you power things? So can you just address that? And then I'll interject if I've got other questions there, but just kind of bring us on that boat. Like, tell us what happens for you.
Okay. So rowing the Atlantic 8 years ago, I rowed with somebody else and we ate mostly freeze-dried that we laced with olive oil. And a variety was key.
Gross.
No, it brings it to life because
Okay.
actually freeze-dried has no fat. Because if you think about it, if it was frozen, if it was freeze-dried, it would congeal. Mm-hmm. So you need to put the fat back and it makes it much more flavorful. If you've got freeze-dried spaghetti bolognese, you wouldn't cook onions and garlic in water, would you? You'd cook them in oil.
Right.
So a lot of those meals just come to life. And yeah, so we were all about variety. Like, what can we eat? Something different. But
How long was
strangely,
that? How long was that
74
crossing?
days. No records were broken that year. It was a long, hot slog with no wind. And this being solo is totally different because you're making so many decisions in other areas and responding to the stimuli all by yourself that actually I want food as a constant. I can eat the same meal every single day. All of the components that I eat at the same time every single day. When I was like, yeah, imagine that. And the only variety is maybe the lunch freeze-dried meal or the dinner is different and everything else is not freeze-dried anymore.
Other than the 12-day journey that you did from San Francisco down to Santa Barbara, have you done solo trips before, like big solo trips?
Outside of these 2 years, no. Well, I've sailed solo. So I've sailed across the Atlantic in 3 different races alone.
Okay.
So I've spent a month or so by myself in the ocean. And I've now done almost 2,000 miles in training in my existing boat. So I have some experience now.
Right. Yeah, but 2,000, not to take anything away from that, but 2,000 miles chopped up is quite
Correct.
different than, like you said, a month on a sailboat.
Well, that's where that trip down the coast was a 10-day, 12 and a half days solid. It changes everything. Like a 4-hour row or even an overnight is totally different from day after day when you have to do laundry and you have to charge stuff and you have to make water, things you do not have to do on a weekend because you just go home and use a machine.
And you have to be in your head.
Yeah, you have to make sure you have audiobooks, lots of music to listen to.
Well, there's that, but just being in your head, just the mental aspect of it.
Right, but I also had Spotify and it didn't work offhand. And I had one album, which was the album that came with the phone, which was obviously U2, which I listened to 64 times, according to
I have that one on
iTunes.
my phone too, yeah.
And I can tell you what song comes next and what the words are, which I never want to listen to again. I deleted it on arrival. So yeah, back to food. Food is very consistent. I will take 5 months only. And this scares a lot of people. I go, could take 4 months, could take 6 months. I'm going to take 5 months only. Because Sarah, and I'm not sure about Charlie, but they took 9 months of food. Ooh. And I was like, yeah, exactly. Because if you take more weight, you need more calories because it's more work. And if it's more work, then you're going to need more food, which means you need more calories. And this cycle just goes on and on. So I reckon if you cut it at 5, that adds an edge right from the beginning.
So you go a little faster from the start.
You wake up that bit earlier and you row that bit harder, like I did on the coastal row. It took 12 and a half days and I had 10 days worth of food. But my error there was those 3 days at the beginning. My 30% contingency was gone in the first instance. And so if I didn't finish that freeze-dried meal, I zipped it up and I put it in the boat. I kept every single potential mouthful of food and I arrived with nothing at all, just a bunch of protein powder and I think like 1 nut butter. That was it. It was getting pretty dire at the end there.
You were having to conserve? Were you being really careful?
I didn't ration, I didn't conserve, but the diet changed quite a bit in the last day or two because I'm not mad about those eating almond butter neat, but towards the end of it I was like, ooh, almond butter, like
those little Justins things.
Yes,
those little containers,
they stick at the top of the mouth and I think they're great, but to eat neat like without anything, I'm not a fan, but I became a fan. Isn't that amazing?
Desperation.
Yeah, so that's food. So I'm taking 5 months only.
And so it'll be mostly freeze-dried food, freeze-dried in oils, or do you bring
a lot of snacks,
like protein bars and that kind of thing?
A lot of nuts and powdered food.
Oh, did you say nope so quickly to the protein bars because you don't want the processed food, or because you're just going to get more fat and calories out of a bag of nuts?
It's the sugar content for me. I've had huge waves. I started with Vega, I think 2 years ago, which I loved. And then I kind of grew out of that strangely. And then I had a Cliff Bar phase and I grew out of that. And I'm in my Pro Bar phase at the moment because they are the highest calorie bang for buck, like per weight. But a lot of them
really
are really
good
sweet.
Flavors too.
Yeah, I love those for breakfast, but they're quite sweet. And I'm not sure if they'll cross with me yet. I'm giving them a good run for trial. So dried fruit, dried nuts, dried meat, cheese, parmesan, which I'm not sure is going to survive, but we'll see. I might have to take the whole round.
Mm-hmm.
Chocolate, a lot of chocolate, oils, as I mentioned. And really, freeze-dry is just a vehicle for oil.
What will the temperature be like that you can have chocolate? It won't be
moderate temperature. In the Atlantic, that was so depressing because the chocolate was basically a puddle during the day. And I was like, oh, it's cold enough now. And then you can eat it off the wrapper.
At night, yeah. Once it's
at night only. You can only eat chocolate at night.
Mm-hmm.
Once it was a solid again.
Which, by the way, was a Chris Talley thing for me. He said have 1 to 2 ounces of chocolate at night because it cleans out your system.
Night?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And do you do that? Is that like, isn't it a stimulant before bed?
No, it's not for me. No. I mean, at first I took his advice to heart and I was eating 1 to 2 ounces. And then I was like, this is ridiculous because that's so many calories. I couldn't even do that many calories. So I probably have an ounce a day of dark chocolate. But I just have it when I want to have it, not necessarily at night. But yeah, there's something in it. I'd have to go back and listen to I recorded my my conversation with him. But yeah, there's something in it that actually cleans out your system. So,
interesting.
Yeah.
Love that advice.
Side note, yeah.
Yeah, I've always loved chocolate mid-morning. I don't know. There's something feels very indulgent to basically eat chocolate for breakfast. And I've never got out of that delicious idea. Yeah, so everything on my boat is basically waterproof. I have a Gore-Tex sleeping bag, which is wow worth its money. It's a company called Ocean Sleepwear, and they've designed them for round-the-world sailing races and the Arctic and the Antarctica. And wow, it's like a giant cuddly teddy bear with a Gore-Tex lining. You can get it wet and stuff. In fact, I had a dump load of water come through the hatch onto my hair, onto my pillow, and all I did was flip the pillow over and go back to sleep. Going, that's annoying. I hate that.
Yeah,
but,
I'll deal with it
But
tomorrow.
the pillow's like waterproof, so that's great. So I make water. I have a water maker that desalinates, and that's the thing you have to carefully manage because you have limited power generated by solar only. So
and that's a power generated item.
Yeah.
Appliance.
Well, the solar power go into the batteries and then the batteries power the water maker. So it's a power management system that you need to be careful on.
It's not something that just you collect the water and you collect the salt water and it drips through and takes out the salt.
No, it's a high pressure membrane. It's under pressure. And you need water for rehydrating meals, for washing, for drinking, for laundry. And rowing down the coast is very hard to dry clothing. I basically had to dry it up my shirt to wear it.
Yeah, to keep it warm, right, and dry.
Yeah, it was such a damp, moist, saline environment near the coastline, and nothing really dried.
How often are you washing your hair, washing your skin, and doing laundry when you're on a trip? Because I can imagine kind of why bother.
Oh no! You just stay ahead of that. I try and do 1 or 2 items of laundry a day, so it's never.
How much are you wearing?
Never an issue. Well, it's not clothes I'm washing so much. It's my seat cover and say my pants
that are getting covered in the salt water.
It's more hygiene. So you're sweating, so you need to keep that clean so that you don't have issues, and you want to keep salt away, of course, as well. The top, I think. Yeah,
See, I just think because I've been on like big long treks where I'm just in the same. Actually, the shirt I'm wearing, it's like it's good. It's an icebreaker shirt, which is really great, merino wool, which is great for trekking because you can wear it for ages, and it's got the whatever it's got in it that prevents it from smelling. I'm not coming up with the right words for it, but so I would just imagine that you'd be out there on the boat. You're by yourself. You don't care, but you're saying really for hygiene, you've got to wash out your stuff.
Yeah, and you need to wash your hands because if you think about it, you're living in such a small space. It's your gym, your kitchen, and your bathroom all in the same 4 or 5 square feet. So you need to be on top of hygiene and sanitation, or you make yourself sick, like bacteria sick rather than virus or illness sick. Yeah, so clothing I do like 1 or 2 pieces. I guess I wash my hair once a week, not even that much. The body. Yeah, from the waist down, you wash a little bit more frequently, maybe every other day. But it really depends on the conditions. If it's hot, then you wash more often because you're sweating more frequently. But if it's cold, then yeah, it could be a day or so. But you really want to stay on top of that because even when it's cold, you are sweating. You just don't really feel it as much.
Mm-hmm. I know that from running. It's the weirdest thing. I'm like, how can it be 32 degrees out and I'm sweating? It just like doesn't make sense.
Yeah, because there's a very light perspiration on the skin. And so that's, washing. What else do you want to talk about?
Yeah. Well, tell me where you sleep.
Oh, so I sleep in the back cabin, and it's not generous amount of space, but I sleep very well in my boat.
Curled up. Aren't you petrified?
No.
At night, it's all dark. You don't know what's out there.
At the beginning, so 2 years ago when I started rowing outside the bay, I was mostly very scared of ships and their proximity, but I became more comfortable trusting my instincts. And so I was drifting around, say on parachute anchor, and I could hear this channel marker.
Oh, is that what you do at night? You set an anchor?
Yes.
That was one of my questions.
It depends.
Too.
You can just free drift if that's favorable, or you put out a sea anchor, big giant parachute to hold ground, to not stray elsewhere.
So you watch the tides. You have information to tell you where you might drift if you just drift.
Well, you have to sort of work it out. This is coastal, where you have tidal problems. In the middle of the ocean, you don't have tidal problems.
Okay, so yeah, I'm using the wrong words here because that's just my ignorance about it, which is okay.
Current would be better.
So the current, yeah, thank you. So you're out in the middle of the Pacific, and you have information that tells you kind of where the current will be going, and if you can go to sleep for 6 hours, you know whether it's favorable to drift or not. Otherwise, you'll set the anchor.
Well, so let's use this word current first. So like the Gulf Stream, which runs along the east coast of America, you have the Kuroshio current, which runs past Japan. That is a current. So that's a 4.5 knot warm current. So I'll use I'll use a thermometer, basically, that's in the bottom of my boat to tell me where I am in relation to that current. So that's the first thing. So outside of that current, that only goes for the first third or quarter even of the crossing. Then Then it's looking at the conditions more. So forget currents and tides. It's more like, am I drifting with the wind in this way? So it's wind and wave direction. And you go, yes, based on the last number of hours, seems pretty consistent. I'll sleep for this many hours and then check. But if it is variable, or I might stray into a shipping lane, then I have to put out this parachute anchor.
So you mentioned shipping lanes, which is another thing that I would have been ignorant about. There are specific lanes where the ships are gonna move. So if you're out,
there are off land. So in the 30 miles off the land, there are designated shipping lanes that they must legally follow. Outside of that, free for all. But you can basically draw a line between those shipping lanes and these shipping lines, and the cargo ships will draw a straight line across those, plus or minus. So you start to know where their band is, and I will drop out of that really quick. But for the first, 100 miles or so, on either end,
you have to be more aware.
You have to be more aware.
Okay. And so then once you're out there, you may not see another ship for weeks.
Correct. I may see no one. I may see one. I won't see many, except when I start to converge on land. Then you see planes first, but then you see ships.
And how long is your sleep cycle?
It depends. So in a coastal area, it could be as low as 40 minutes per nap, and as much as 4 hours. But in the ocean, you could sleep all night if you wanted to.
So do you? Do you sleep for 6 or 8 hours?
Sometimes.
Yeah. No, that's great. Yeah. But I would imagine, are you rowing when you're not sleeping? Or do you just like, okay, I'm going to read a book now?
No, I'm rowing. I'm doing something.
So 12 hours, 15 hours a day.
Yeah. So it depends on the weather. So if you can't, if the conditions aren't great to row in the morning, you might stay on the anchor until, say the early part of the evening or the early part of the afternoon. And then I might row until midnight. But what I've learned through my involvement with all these specialists is that human growth hormone is released a couple of hours after you go to sleep, or even 1 hour at a very consistent time. And you really want to be in bed at that time. That's the body's natural repair. So sleeping at night is far more productive, useful sleep
for recovery.
Yes, than sleeping or napping during the day. And so I came into this thinking I will row at night, the stars, the moon, which we did in the Atlantic because we switched out constantly. And I'm almost sorry that's not going to happen. But it's not productive because amazingly, when I don't row at night and I just become a day worker, a day rower, I can row a 3-hour session followed by a 6 or a 3, and I can do 3 of those. So a 9-hour minimum day. Between 9 and 16 is an extreme day. So 9 to 12, let's call it 12. And it's very sustainable because I'm rowing at 100, 110 heart rate. And I monitor that because if it increases up, usually it's because I'm hot and I just need to shed a layer. And then we go back down to that level. And that's basically a sort of moderate walking pace.
And the rowing that you're doing, because I've seen that on the video, it's very much like a rowing machine. Like if someone were to visualize it, it's
it's not at all like a rowing machine. In fact, I got rid of my rowing machine.
Oh, but isn't it? But when I saw it on the video, you're kind of moving forward and back.
It's a sliding
in a
seat in that way. Yeah. But yes, the rowing machine is nothing really like rowing an ocean.
But it is.
It's a sliding seat row.
Yeah.
Yes, that's what you mean by that.
I don't know what I meant by it, but I was just visualizing it.
That's okay. But
like
most rowers who want to row an ocean train on a rowing machine, I think that's wildly the wrong thing to do. I've switched to cycling. Because it's a leg sport. You drive through the legs. Once you've got enough upper body sport, you want the power in your legs, in your glutes and hamstrings.
So are you cycling at home on a trainer, or
Correct.
Are you out on a bike?
I'm using one of the bike ergs, which offer more resistance than a spin bike. So it's not about numbers. It's about grunt, and heart rate and time rather than 20K or whatever you want to achieve.
So just a couple more specifics, and then we'll finally go back in time briefly. How do you pee? How do you take care of your head in a pot?
Yeah.
What if you have to poop?
In a bucket.
And then you dump it over?
Yes.
And that's okay. That's just natural because fish poop there too.
That's right. That's right.
So it's all right. And fish and wildlife, any scary encounters, or when you're out in terms of the wildlife, any scary encounters, or once you're out there, it's all kind of like friendly?
I love it. I totally love it. And I think my mother is studied botany at university, among other things. And she has an incredible perception for spotting wildflowers and interesting plants. And, we can be on the same walk together in the country and she's pointing out left and right things that are oblivious to me. And I think sometimes I'm like that in the ocean, that I see I happened to look left or sense something or other and see all of this wildlife, because some people row the Atlantic now and they say, we didn't see anything. I'm like, really? Like I see something every single day. I kid you not. There's a dolphin or whale or some creature. You just have to look over the side.
Yeah, you're just tuned into it.
But the wildlife don't know what you are, firstly, and then if they do, they perhaps think you are one of them. But there's no threat because you don't emit smell or sound. And so I have incredible moments where whales have sonar pinged the boat trying to communicate with it. And it's like, I don't know what you're saying because I don't speak whale, but I would love to.
Yeah. So they're trying to talk to you.
They're trying to talk to me. And then in the Atlantic, we had amazing moments where dolphins would hang out like a dog at your feet. If you weren't feeling so good, you were a bit down. And 3 hours, sometimes they would hang out, plop either side of the oars around the bow of the boat. And then you feel your spirits start to lift and you just look around and they've gone. And very much like a dog that sits on your actual foot, if you're not feeling so great. They sense it.
And nothing with the whales, no rubbing up against you or anything. They've never.
Not on this boat. I
it.
have had that on other boats, but I've had whales swim the same wave that I've been rowing down, and eyeball me sideways. Just stunning. I mean, just last year when I rowed down to Santa Barbara, I had like a whale broach the other side of my oar. And they just crept closer. In fact, that whole trip, I felt like I was escorted by whales. And you start to have these imaginary conversations with them.
Yeah. Well, it's probably not so imaginary. I mean, I'm sure they are speaking to you in some way. They're going, speak. How come you don't speak whale? I want to know what you're saying.
Yeah, like there was a moment where the wind was just not. It was coming from the south. It wasn't very strong, but I couldn't row into it. And the waves were leaping and leaping and leaping, just pounding the surface. And it just felt like they were going, we will pound it flat for you.
Aww.
And then go and have a nap. So I had a nap.
Yeah.
I start to have these conversations.
Right.
And then sure enough, I woke up and the sea was flat and the whales were gone.
Do you take pictures along the way?
I take a lot of film. And I'm trying to get better at capturing
When
wildlife.
You say film, do you mean?
GoPro stuff.
Okay, so video you're taking.
Video, yeah.
Mainly.
But I haven't yet done stuff to camera. And that's sort of the next thing. It's like, I'm waking up and I'm, la, la, la. Like, so far it's just been turning cameras on and off and in a way, library footage.
GoPros.
Yeah.
How do you power stuff? So is it all solar powered then?
It's all solar. So again, that's a management job because I've got my heart rate monitor. I've got my Garmin InReach, which is a texting device. I've got my tracker, which I blog through. So you have all these items, and then my speaker, my all-important speaker, so I can listen to audiobooks and music. So you're cycling these objects through a power method. So you charging one thing after another, but really only one thing at a time.
You're listening to something often, or do you just sit in silence for hours and hours?
I have a day routine of that too. So the morning, as I'm waking up, I listen to music, and then I would listen to a book. Comedy is like my preference. And then in the afternoon, I quite like a story. So my favourites for the row down the coast was Trevor Noah's biography. Was outstanding and funny. That was great. That was many mornings. And then in the afternoon, I listened to Shackleton's Endurance.
Oh, wow.
I mean, what a great juxtaposition. I was going down these wobbly mountains, 25-foot waves, and it was quite wild and fast at that point. And Shackleton and his team were trying to, go to Elephant Island and surviving and eating their dogs and killing seals and stuff. And it was just like, they're out there and I'm out here and, we're in it together. And even though we're like generate decades apart. And then in the evening, I listen to music. And then after that, I listen to nothing.
Oh, the other question I was going to ask was, do you have contact with people along the way? Or do you only have like a sat phone for emergencies? Do you stay in contact with anyone?
I blog. And I write a surprising amount because I audio blog. So I read it into my phone, then I check it for grammar, and then I Bluetooth it to my tracking device. So it comes up on my tracking page.
What's your tracking device?
It's on my website, there's a tab called Where is Lia? And it comes up. There's my location, and then you can see there's a little message above it, and that opens up to read the blog.
Okay, so it's all being just satellite, going up by satellite.
It's not a very affordable way of doing it, but it is. In terms of, I pay for credit to do that rather than hardware. So for the actual row, I need to switch that to more expensive hardware, which I haven't yet bought. And then the credit line charges will come down a bit.
Right. Well, that sponsor will come through to take care of that for you.
Thanks.
No doubt. No doubt. So let's go back. And gosh, I really thank you so much for explaining all of this, because I do find it so incredibly fascinating. And, just like I said, I just have so little knowledge about how it all works, that to have that background is really great. But now I'm curious as to how the heck you got into this, because I know you did your big first row at 25. Is that right?
No. So my first solo ocean thing was 25, which was sailing.
But you had been rowing previous to that,
No,
but not long.
Never.
No.
No, that was sailing. I didn't row until I rowed an ocean at age 30.
Got it. So let's go back and educate me on how you got started in it, and kind of your previous life before that, and what that transition was all about.
So I had no exposure to rowing at all. I didn't go to a university, and there are only two in the UK, Oxford and Cambridge, that do rowing anyway. And Cambridge was far too near my parents' house. And I did get in, and I was just like, I'm not going there. I'm going to go to the other end of the country, and that'll be great. It would never have worked anyway, because I was a sleep till noon teenager. So that's just was being incompatible. But I was passionate about art. I was very, very passionate about art. And I went to India to learn stone carving as part of my degree at art school. And then,
did you go there on your own, or was that part actually?
Age 20, which was a plunge into the deep end.
Yeah.
And then I wandered around India for like 6 months and did not carve stone like I was supposed to. And famously threw my essay off the balcony at Kanyakumari, which is at the very
India.
bottom of India where the three seas collide.
Yeah.
And I was like, to hell with this. And I went on to Thailand and I spent 3 months in Thailand, and then I stumbled on a yacht race. And I didn't really know how to sail. Had sailed because my parents had a 21-footer. And we had spent 6 weeks as a family of 4 on a 21-footer. And I had sworn I would never set foot on another sailboat. And of course, then I'm sending my parents an email going, I'm just going to sail home.
You're what?
Yeah, exactly. So that caused them great amusement. Mostly they didn't believe that I was going to do that. So I did. I hitchhiked on a boat after this regatta that wasn't a race boat back to Europe. And it changed my life. Like, we stopped in 10 countries. But it wasn't so much the travel of it to these different countries. It was just the freedom of the ocean. I loved being outside of land.
Had you not felt that before? Was that really the first experience of that for you?
Yes, this voyaging idea, this passport. Boat, it was a passport to incredible adventures in other places with people. And I started doing a lot of snorkeling up the Red Sea. It was just this underwater world. I think I'd gone into that time away in Asia thinking, disillusioned horribly with art. And then in the trip, I discovered that the world was art and I just need to go out and see it. And in the Red Sea, of course, oh my goodness, the color, the creatures. I lived this very otherworldly under the surface and fell in love with that completely and utterly. But I'm not a diver. I've always had ear issues. I ruptured an eardrum when I was little. And so that just wasn't an option. It was something I enjoyed, but I wasn't going to now go and be a diver. That wasn't going to happen. But I came back from that, and everyone I met on the Red Sea said, if you like sailing, you've got to go to the Caribbean. But growing up in England, this Caribbean wasn't somewhere I was ever going to go in my lifetime. It was a very expensive flight. People went to resorts. It was thousands of pounds. The same with Hawaii. But of course, just as I got back, the cheap flight era began. And I spent a whole week studying this algorithm of how do I afford to get to America on my no money, sort of thing. And it was like 11 a.m. on a Tuesday. That was that
was the magic.
Yeah,
right?
That was like the plunge. And I bought a one-way ticket, a return ticket to New York for £200. 6-month return or something like that. But it was also after 9/11. No one wanted to go there.
Oh, sure.
So yeah, I went to the Caribbean and I hitchhiked up through the Caribbean on boats. And along the way, I met people wearing uniforms, working on these giant power boats. And I was like, what? There's an industry? People pay you to do that? While I'm like bopping around on little private boats. And by the time I got to Fort Lauderdale, of course, oh my goodness, Fort Lauderdale, that place is full of boats. And they're all, they all have staff on them and crew. And I sort of fell into the marine industry that way. But at the beginning, of course, all they want you to do as a woman is clean, stewardessing and cooking. And that was never going to be my thing.
How did you make the leap to captain then?
Well, I did my fair share of cleaning, and I cooked as well. In fact, I went to try out as a chef on some of these big boats. I bought myself a knife and a book, and I went and I cooked dinner for these trial dinners.
Yeah.
And at the end, they were like, yeah, this is really good. We think, this could work out. And I go, look, sorry to let you down, but I just came to cook us dinner because I'm living on that race boat over there.
Yeah.
And they would find this really funny. But often in the future, they go, okay, we know you can cook. Please, we need cook, to come back and help us in the short time.
You just wanted a meal?
Yes.
Is that what Oh, I see. So, and they were paying for it.
Yeah,
because
I was trying out for a job, even though it wasn't. I didn't want the job.
You just wanted the food.
Yeah, so there was about 4 or 5 of us living in a hostel-style environment on a broken race boat that was out of the water, and we had a TV, and that was the only light source we had. So you turned on the TV, plundered your way into one of the rack bunks, and you slept in your, foul weather. You didn't have sleeping bags or anything. And so in the daytime I cleaned, and in the evening I tried out to be a chef, even though I didn't want to be a chef. And then finally I got onto race boats, but mostly just moving them around. They had all male rules at that time. They had no women. We don't want women. They actually said that. This was the early 2000s.
They don't want women as crew members. Correct. Or as captains?
No women on the boat because women were destructive. They often,
destructive to the men.
Yes, they were distraction.
Yeah.
And, the guys were trying to pick up girls, or they had picked them up, and this is the day after. And it was clearly a pattern that was happening. And I somehow slid onto one of those crews because I delivered the boat, and then I that particular owner didn't want to pay for my train ticket back. How bad is that? So I did this overnight race, and I was so cold. I was like, let me at it, and churning out sandwiches and packing spinnakers because I thought that was it. This was my one moment in the sailing thing. It was just an amazing opportunity, even though it was freezing cold. And then I stayed on that boat for the whole season and sort of slowly. What
does it take to have a captain's license? Because are you technically licensed as a captain?
Yes, I'm a licensed captain.
So what does it take to get a license?
Well, so that didn't come till a couple of years later when I was now moving boats quite readily, and somebody decided not to pay me based on the fact that my male colleagues had licenses and I did not. And I was like, well, that's the end of that.
So you were able to work at moving the boats without a license?
Yes, because I had thousands of miles of experience. In fact, in experience terms, I had more actual hands-on time than a lot of the other crew, but I hadn't gone to school first and got a ticket first. I'd done it the other way around, and I wasn't having that. I wasn't not getting paid just because of a piece of paper. So I then I did mine in South Africa because it was much, much cheaper, and then did the actual exam in the UK.
How long is the schooling?
There are many parts to it if you do the RYA one, which is the non-American version. In a way, it's a little bit more recommendable because it's acknowledged around the world. You have to do firefighting, sea survival, first aid. You have to be able to navigate, go on a passage. I think the actual exam was a week long.
So it's a series of classes and then a week long exam?
Correct, yeah. A lot of it's very fun. Like the firefighting was very fun, and particularly in South Africa. During the first aid, we actually went into hospital and did a lot of it for real. Unbelievable. Doing a chest drain and stuff for real.
Ooh.
Basically after a few days in a classroom.
Do you have to go each year to get it renewed?
Every 5 years you have to renew some part of it. There was a recent update where you had to sit a sort of written exam. So I sat that. And then you have to do a medical as well, which is just money for nothing, really. Everything all right with you? Fine, here's a certificate. Like, how much is that?
Yeah, exactly.
But I don't really use the commercial side of my license. That's very important if you're taking out passengers and they're paying money. But it does help. Insurance companies sometimes request it, but very rarely. Mostly they go, oh, you've been where, you've done what. Like the experience is of greater weight than the piece of paper, as it should be.
So then what brought you to that first crossing? The first Atlantic crossing? What happened?
So that actually dovetails to stumbling into the marine industry, cleaning during the day, cooking on boats as trials at night. And I was trying to get a job. And I had just gone for an interview on a job where it was a couple who ran this boat, and it was a sort of fat-bellied sailing boat I couldn't get excited about in the first place. And the wife had asked me if I liked ironing. But she meant it, do you happen to like ironing, do you, sort of thing. And the husband had taken me on deck, and he was extolling the virtues of this sort of covered wheelhouse. It's like a greenhouse vinyl. He's like, it's just so great that it's covered because I can steer at night in my bedroom slippers. And I'd gone up the Red Sea, and I wanted the wind in my face and the spray. I wanted the raw experience of sailing. I really did not envisage ironing and standing around at night in my slippers. This was not my idea at all. And I couldn't get off that boat fast enough. And back at the dock, there was this thing, and it was 3-hulled, and it looked like a spaceship, but it was on water. And I was like, oh my God, what is it? So I went over to ask the only person visible, going, what is it? And where are you going? And they said, oh, we're going across the Atlantic for the start of this race called the OSTAR. I was like, oh my God, you have to take me with you. And he said, no, we got crew. And I said, oh, it's such a great adventure. I'm not employed. Can I help? So over the next 10 days, I helped them pack and shop and clean and get ready. And I was like, this is going to be so great for you people. I want to come. And then the 10th day, the owner and captain knocked on the door really early of my friend's place and said, wake up, Lia, we're going shopping. We're buying you a survival suit. You're coming with us. And,
awesome.
And then that should have been the first clue that trip wouldn't go as well as planned.
Oh, because it was so last minute, you mean?
No, because of the survival suit.
Oh.
So we ended up going through a hurricane, and the boat cracked, and we took on water.
Ooh.
And then we actually had to run up at the beach in the Azores to save the boat.
And this is going from the Caribbean or from Florida to...
This was actually from Newport, so New England to... Originally England, but then we went to Portugal instead. But it was a life-changing trip because that moment with the hurricane, I didn't know we could die. I didn't know that we were in an extremely precarious position with this slightly broken boat in 75 knots of wind going down these enormous waves. And really any single wave could have dropped the mast, ploughed the boat into the wave, and we would have been fighting for our lives. And no one could have rescued you in those conditions. And I took the helm for what was supposed to be 5 minutes and ended up being 8 hours. And I drove through the storm. And that
Why you?
A couple of the crew were burnt out. They'd already done a lot of the driving in the run up to that night. And I guess I was doing all right.
And you just had it in you to do it. I mean, it wasn't like you were...
I didn't feel fear. I didn't know that was a fearful situation. My artist side of my brain was completely lit up because it was stunning. There was such energy in this fierce environment. The waves were loud and roaring, and then they were jade and brilliant luminous white because they were being ripped open by their own mass. And as you rose up onto this wave, it was like this marching band, like these great rolls of carpet, like thundering across this horizon. And the tops of the waves were flying straight horizontally in streaks. So it's just this wildness about it. And I don't know, I found it I was just so in awe that the fear side of my brain was overwhelmed by the joy of this environment. And
do you think these other people on the boat that they were
feel
overwhelmed?
That.
Well, they were overwhelmed by
One
it.
guy, he had been steering until his arms were burning, so he needed a rest. And then the other guy, we argue about this. I say he was in denial. He say he was resting up for the next watch. And then the captain was just exhausted emotionally and physically. And so I was supposed to take the wheel while they were setting up a sea anchor, like a line to drag to drop our speed a little bit. And it was just supposed to be a few minutes because I was the least experienced person on board. And I remember Craig whispering in my ear, our lives are in your hands, But it was, the reason I didn't break from that is because it took so much concentration. And if you're that focused and that concentrating, you're not aware of anything. It was center the 3 hulls, grab the wheel, ride this thundering roller coaster down, and then carve up the next wave. So you got into this cycle of each of those requirements. And
did you feel like it was 5 minutes that went by or 12 hours that went by?
I had no concept of time at all. In fact, the only thing that snapped me out of that pattern was daylight. I was like, oh my goodness, it's daylight and I'm hungry.
Oh, was this happening at night?
Yes, from about 2 a.m. till daylight. But it gave me confidence. It gave me confidence to then sail solo across the Atlantic. And I still feared that, but I had been through it. And I can't rewind it and know what I would have done if I hadn't been through that. Like it was.
And was that the OSTAR? The
OSTAR, yeah.
Yeah, that you went on. That was the solo sailing.
Yes.
Is that correct?
So when we ran the boat aground on the Azores to fix the boat, we crossed paths with a race coming the other way, which was solo. And up until that point, I didn't know people sailed across oceans solo. It's like very back-footed learning about this. And I was like, oh my goodness, this guy in this very falling apart now boat has just sailed a larger version of ours, which was 50 feet, and his was 60 something, but just much, much bigger. Limping in. One guy came in without a boat on a cargo ship. Another guy took all day because half his mainsail was all he had to sail. And the beam was hanging like in bits. And his shore team flew in and we hung out with them. And I cooked food for them. And they were working around the clock with lights. And then he went to a hotel and he set off the next day. And that was another race. And I did that race too. So we were delivering a boat to England for the 2-star, which was the 2-person version of the solo race I ended up doing. And we crossed paths with the Route du Rhum, which was the next race that I did also.
What was the year when you did that fateful crossing where where you hit the hurricane?
2002.
And then when was your first solo crossing?
2005.
Okay, so a few years later, you got prepared for that and then did the big crossing.
Yes.
You were like the 53rd woman or something like that who had
No, that was rowing the Atlantic.
Okay.
But for the solo races, I was the only woman to finish that race. I was also the youngest person. And then for the Route du Rhum, I only learned this recently, actually. I was the sixth woman ever in the history of the race to complete the race. Now there's been a handful, but even in the last edition of the race, which was 2018, only 6 women entered out of almost 130, and only 2 finished, or 3. So it's still very rare, even in France.
What do you think is the reason why more women aren't involved in that particular sport? Maybe just big like adventure endurance sports in general. Like the ratio is.
Well, so for sailing, I mean, you have to like sailing first, and you have to be exposed to it, and then being given the controls in some way. Like you get to drive, you get to pull stuff. Where it's very easy, even in my family, where dad did everything. And you just sit around kind of thing. And then the second one is the perception that you need body strength. You don't always. And then there's this, can you stomach it? Literally, a seasickness. And also the washing and the pooing in the bucket and like the hygiene elements and the poor sleep. Like, is that your cup of tea? And then say you love all of that stuff. Then it's how do you get on what is predominantly boy sport into racing? How do you move up that ladder? Yeah, it's like obstacles every which way you look.
So what's in your DNA that not only that you love it, you have access to it, you've fought your way through it, and that you've been successful in that? What makes you different?
Well, if you think about it, I don't have a conventional beginning. I didn't row at school and I didn't do sailing at school. I went as an artist to Asia, and then I stumbled on a boat home, and then into an industry I didn't know existed, and into a race world I didn't know was there. Mostly it's curiosity that led me down those paths, going, ooh, could I have handled that storm by myself? Like I wasn't sure.
Do you have siblings?
I have a brother.
Is he as curious as you?
He's climbing motorcycles.
Okay, and then did
other ways to die?
Yeah, exactly. Did you learn fearlessness from your parents?
Perhaps, but on the little boat, the 21-footer, you can have a lot of misadventures on the 21-footer.
Did you when you were growing up? And
I don't think my parents were that experienced as sailors.
And so you learned from them that you could get through anything because you had misadventures and you lived.
Not really. I think I learned that in India, being ill and plundering around Asia by myself. And then, holding my own on this boat coming back across the Indian Ocean.
Yeah, but it took something for you as a 20-year-old to go to India by yourself. I mean, I would argue from my own experience in going to India as one of the first countries I've ever been to that ignorance plays a big part in that. Because at that age, you cannot imagine what you're getting into when you go to India.
Which is funny too, because it's not like I went to do yoga and I didn't eat spicy food before I went there. In fact, I called pepper a spice up to that point. So my parents had no feeling that would work out. Like, she'll be back. Like, she either won't go at all or she'll be back in a week. And I just couldn't imagine that this was going ahead. And then it did. And then they kind of woke up to it going, really?
Did you love it when you got there?
I mean, I think everyone has a love-hate relationship with India. There's definitely amazing parts of that country, but it's challenging. The people are challenging. I went there because I didn't know where else to go or what else to do. Like I'd spent all of my being wanting to be an artist and study sculpture, and then I'd gone to the wrong art school, which was very conceptual and about philosophy, and I was trapped because it was one of the prestigious colleges. They took 24 people out of 450 applicants. They wouldn't even let me leave. They wouldn't let me drop out. And so I guess dropping out was going to India. I'm going to physically check out. How's that?
Did you ever finish your degree?
I did. I went back in 2006 and at that same college and did it as part of my sailing. So I sailed across the Atlantic in the OSTAR and said, this is a performance artwork. I'm going to explore the nature of absolute solitude. I was at university. That was the time difference between 2002 and 2005 was I went back to art school. And then 2006, I reenacted my crossing outside the Tate Britain Gallery with my boat as a performance artwork.
I read about that. Yeah. So you sat in the boat for 28 days or something like that outside the
London.
Tate. Yeah. Outside
so
of
I
the
merged
Tate
the
Gallery.
two things. I now, fall in love with sailing and I still loved art. And I was like, all right, I'm going to finish this on my own terms and do it with boats.
Well, what is it like? Because you said absolute solitude. Is that
Yeah.
the phrase that you use? What is it like to be in absolute solitude for such extended periods of time?
Well, there are different flavors of it. So when you're in a sailing race, you're so busy. You're constantly attending to the sails and the wind direction and catching up with food and sleep. And it's just this merry-go-round of stuff you have to do. And the rowing is the same in some ways, but it's far more meditative. There's a lot more time in your own head where you're rhythmically rowing. Yes, there are a lot of decisions going on a subconscious or conscious level of I'm now adjusting the steering or whatever, like the conditions are changing, but it's not nearly as fast paced because you're not moving as fast.
And I know you are spending some time with other things like auditory things, but there's a lot of time too where you're just in your head in the quiet. How do you get through that? And I know from my own experience as a runner, if I go out for a Sunday run and I'm out for 3 or 4 hours, and I do that pretty regularly, and I go out, there are some days, like I'll have a podcast in, but there are some days where I'm like, get out of my ears. I can't stand it any longer. And then I'm just with myself. And then sometimes I have a hard time staying motivated. Like my mind is it's elsewhere. It's like on my to-do list, or it's that email that I have to craft in my head. Is there a way, does that even happen to you? And then if it does, how do you center yourself back?
It does happen. And I think communications devices are the worst. My phone goes or something and I go, oh, check it, but I'm supposed to be rowing. And so really the best thing is turn it to silent when I go rowing. But I do demotivate at times going, anything but this, like I'll eat that, I'll do this. But I think with the rowing, the only way to get there is to row home. So at some point you've got to address that. You can drift around for a little bit if you like, Leah, and you can like faff around, but if you want to go home,
right.
If you want to get back in,
yeah.
you got to get back
in. I know, I think the same thing with running. If I'm 11 miles in and I'm like, I could just call John, or I've got my phone, I could call a Lyft, like that's ridiculous. Just keep going. And the more you putz around and you take your mind off it, what you're actually doing, the slower you're going to be. You could have been home by now if you didn't stop to have that extra gel or pee or whatever you had to do. So
yeah, you snap back into it.
I do know that feeling.
So I think because I've spent 2 years doing it and I've done nearly 2,000 miles in this boat, I think we're past that. Like, I know what to do. It's an audiobook or it's a bit of music or I mess around, turning on the cameras.
So it's literally time in the saddle that just doing it, that you get used to it and kind of get past it.
Yeah.
Is that?
I love being out there. I love coming back too.
Yeah, even more.
Yeah. But I don't struggle with being alone at all now. I'm very comfortable. And in any way, I'd say the danger now is the reverse, is the transition back I come back to the dock and my neighbours, are being very kind or they're asking about me and I'm not really engaging. Like I don't feel that we're connecting. And that I'd say I struggle with more now than being alone. It's like I'm so comfortable being alone. I'm almost in danger of being an island. And my life is so weird. Like I spend time rowing around this heavy boat that I'm more in danger of detaching from my friends and the people I would like to connect with. A friend of mine says, yeah, you crave connection, but at the same time, you're very unconnected. Like there's this paradox of these two things.
Have you been in a long-term relationship since you've been doing this?
No, I think they're pretty incompatible.
And you're okay with that?
Yeah, I've come to accept that most men don't really want to get involved with the woman who's going to row an ocean, which is slightly irritating, but
Do you find that across the board? Like, do you find that with men also? Do you notice that the men who are doing these long rows are also not in relationships?
No, it goes the other way. Because women fall in love with this idea of my partner, the adventurous man.
Don't you hate that?
And men do too. So like, we love to have adventurous women, but can you just not do that thing now?
Can't you settle down and have kids? Yeah.
Can you just get it done and then
get it out of your system?
Yeah. Then I want the thing that I'm attracted to you, but I don't want you to do the thing because it scares me.
That's tough. Yeah. But
another paradox.
I know. But hey, you know what? You're following your dream, who you are. And that's just great. Hey, I'm aware that you have a boat show to get to. Your reason for being here in Seattle. So I want to be respectful of your time. But is there anything that we haven't covered that you would like to cover before we wind down?
I think from the outside looking in, most people go, wow, like, how do you start that stuff? And I want to mention now, like, put it on record, how scary it is to begin something like this. Like, I think when I decided that actually the decision wasn't just a eureka moment, I'm going to row the Pacific. Firstly, the seed was planted almost hours after rowing the Atlantic, like, I'd like to ride another ocean. But I'm not sure I believed it. I think I was hoping that life would get in the way, like I'd meet somebody, we'd have kids, and maybe sail around the world with or without the kids. The slow burn to do it happened maybe over a year or more. And then that scary moment where you start telling people out loud, it's like a sonar ping. You're not sure if you're going to get anything back. Like maybe it's a bad idea and you start saying it with a bit more conviction and then you're almost convincing yourself. And now I've said it out loud. Oh my God, I've got committed to it. And I think that's really where you have to begin. It's the leap. And it's so scary. We bound ourselves in the fear of beginning something or saying it out loud or dreaming, allowing a dream to escape into the words of your own mouth.
Do you believe that the universe kind of moves you along if it's the right decision? Or do you think that that's just kind of hokey?
No, it's the famous German quote, by Goethe, whatever you believe you can do, begin it now. Boldness has genius and power and magic in it. And then it goes on to talk about how providence moves with you. It's one of my favorite quotes.
Then you believe it.
Well,
I was just having this conversation with John and I said something about when you make a decision and it's the right one, the universe kind of moves you along. And he was like, practical guy that he is. He's like, no, I just think that his belief is just that you make a decision and you're responsible for that decision and you're responsible for the things that come to you to make that happen. So he's giving me, in this case, credit for whatever is unfolding. And I appreciate that. But I also believe that there are signals that either something isn't the right time for you or it's the right timing and kind of things just move along. Something ends up in your inbox or, you make the right decision to come to Seattle and then the right sponsor opens up for you. Something along, then, it just kind of moves you along.
Well, I think you can't know what will happen next until you put it out there. If you have a need or a want or a desire, until you breathe life into it, no one knows. And so they might say, oh my goodness, you should have said, because I have the answer to that, or I have something for you, or, you want to go on a bike trip? I have a bike. I was about to sell it. Nobody knows until you resonate, with others. So, I think, literally be bold. That's it. That's the podcast is to say these things out loud, and chew them around like gum to see where that goes. And you can spit it out, but you've got to chew.
Well, what does it mean to you to be bold?
To take those steps towards something that you want, that you believe you can achieve, or that you want to try and achieve.
Where can people find you? Your website?
.com on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, and on Patreon.
And we'll be sure to people get over there and do some support of that. On Patreon, definitely. Gosh, thank you so much for spending so much time with me today. And I'm so delighted that this worked out. I'm headed to San Francisco next week. I'll have already been to San Francisco by the time this airs, but I'm headed to San Francisco next week and happen to reach out to you and say, hey, can we get together? And you're like, no, I'm going to be in Seattle. Let's do it there. So thanks. Thanks for making time for me today. It's just delightful to chat with you. Great to meet you in person, too, finally.
We aligned our stars, finally.
The universe was watching out for us.
That's it.
Thanks, Lia.
Cheers.
She's pretty spectacular, isn't she? I'll tell you that the biggest takeaway that I got from that conversation was what she said about how when you take off on some big adventure, you worry about what you're leaving behind. Will you have a job when you come back? Will your friends move on? But what you discover is that you come back and not much has changed, except for you. I really took this to heart as I'm working toward some really big challenges myself. And these are the big running events that I've talked about here on the podcast before. It's the Epic 5 in September, and that's 5 ultra marathons in 5 days on 5 Hawaiian islands, and also the 4 deserts that I'll be doing in 2020. And that's running 150 miles across 4 different deserts around the world. The truth is that when I think about the cost and the time away from quote-unquote work, I wonder if I'm making the right decision. But after hearing Lia, I think, hell yeah, of course I am. I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did and that you got something out of it. Please check out Lia's social media. You can find her at Lia Rowe on all the social channels. And feel free to drop me a line at beth@shesboldpodcast.com and let me know what you thought of this episode or any other one. I'd love to hear how these conversations affect you. For links to all the things we chatted about in this episode, go to shesboldpodcast.com, and there you will find the show notes for this and all episodes. You can also find those links and everything, all the show notes, in whatever podcast app it is that you use to listen to this. While you're there on the She's Bold podcast website, check out my Patreon page. It's basically a way for you to say, yes, I like what I'm hearing on the She's Bold podcast, and I'm willing to support the show and get some special benefits too. You can find out more by going to shesboldpodcast.com/Patreon. You can connect with me by friending me on Facebook. I'm WonderGal on Instagram. And hey, this month, February, I'm giving away a pair of OOFOS shoes. And to enter is pretty easy. You'll first need to send me an email and give me your best tip or tips for packing shoes when you travel. Now, I have my own method, but I know that there are a lot of ways you might end up carrying shoes for a trip. So give it to me, beth@shesboldpodcast.com. That gets you one entry, and that's the critical one. To be entered more than once, make sure you're subscribed to the She's Bold podcast newsletter, which comes out with each new episode. And you can sign up at shesboldpodcast.com/newsletter. You'll get one more entry if you sign up for my monthly newsletter on the Wanderlust and Lipstick site. There, you'll also receive a series of tips for making your travels safer. You can find that at wanderlustandlipstick.com. Don't forget to leave a message at 877-280-5170, and I may feature you and any questions you might have on a future episode. Ladies, you can join the Be Bold Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/Be Bold group. You're going to love the positivity, the encouragement, and the support from that community, which is nearly 2,100 strong. Thanks, as always, for joining me for another episode of the She's Bold podcast. Until next time, be bold.